My neighbor Dave retired last spring. 62 years old, healthy enough, money in the bank. And the first thing he did before the farewell party, before the vacation, was walk into the Social Security office and file for his benefits. I asked him why. He'd heard the same advice everyone hears. Wait. The longer you wait, the bigger the check. He knew that. He'd run the numbers himself. And he looked at me and said, "Alex, I'm not gambling on math that only pays off if I live long enough to collect." That one sentence sent me down a research rabbit hole that took me 3 weeks to climb out of, because it turns out Dave isn't alone. He's not even unusual. He's part of a wave, and the wave is getting bigger. I'm Alex, and today I want to tell you the real story behind why so many people are choosing to claim their Social Security benefits at the earliest possible age. Not because they're broke, not because they didn't do the math, but because for a lot of them, the math actually works out in their favor. Let's get into it. First, let's just look at the scale of what's happening, because I think it reframes everything. According to the Social Security Administration, roughly 31% of eligible Americans claimed their retirement benefits at age 62 inches, 2024, nearly 1 in 3 people. And in just the first 7 months of 2025, over 2.3 million people filed for retirement benefits, a 16% jump compared to the same period the year before. A 16% spike in a single year. This isn't a blip. Something is shifting. And when you dig into the research, the surveys, the behavioral studies, the academic papers, you find not one reason, but 7. 7 distinct explanations for why this is happening, and almost none of them are what the financial headlines assume. Let me start with the math, because this is where every financial advisor wants to begin the conversation. The argument for waiting goes like this. Yes, your monthly check is smaller if you claim early, about 30% smaller. But if you wait until your full retirement age, you get the full amount. And eventually, the bigger monthly payments will catch up to and surpass everything you would have collected by starting early. That crossover point is called the break-even age, and most projections put it somewhere around 79 or 80 years old. Here's the problem. When I sat down with that number 79 or 80 and really thought about what it means, I understood exactly what Dave was saying. If you claim at 62, by the time you hit 67, you've already collected roughly $84,000 in payments. The person who waited hasn't seen $1 yet. And for the waiting strategy to pay off, you need to live past 79 or 80, collecting the larger check long enough to make up that entire gap. Now, statistically, the average American man who reaches 62 lives to about 83, women closer to 86. Those are averages, which means a substantial portion of the population lands below those numbers. For those people, claiming early isn't a mistake. It's the financially correct decision. And here's the thing nobody tells you. The break-even analysis almost never accounts for what you could actually do with the money you collect early. If you invest even part of those early payments at a conservative 7% annual return, the math of waiting becomes a lot less clear-cut. For some people, the financial advantage of waiting shrinks dramatically. For others, it disappears entirely. Now, here's the part of the research that hit me hardest, because it's the part that almost never makes it into the mainstream conversation. A 2024 survey by the Transamerica Center for Retirement Studies found that 58% of retirees left the workforce earlier than they had planned, not because they wanted to, because something happened. A layoff. A health diagnosis, a spouse who needed full-time care, a company that restructured 2 years before the finish line, an industry that changed so fast, their skills became irrelevant overnight. Life did what life does. And I keep thinking about the construction workers, the warehouse workers, the nurses who've been on their feet for 30 years. Research from the Economic Policy Institute found that 1 in 2 American workers over 50 have physically demanding jobs, and more than half of those report working in conditions that are hard on their bodies. For these people, the question of should you claim at 62 or 70 isn't a strategic planning discussion. It's a more honest question. Can I physically keep doing this for another 8 years? And for a lot of them, the answer is simply no. When your body forces the retirement decision before your spreadsheet was ready for it, you take the benefit. You take it at whatever age you are when it happens. And for millions of Americans, that age is 62. Here's a reason that surprised me when I first saw it in the data, and then made complete sense once I thought about it. A 2025 retirement survey asked people who claimed early why they did it, and 38% said they were worried the system might not be there for them if they waited. Nearly 4 in 10 people. That's not a fringe concern. That's a mainstream anxiety. And it's not irrational. The Social Security Trustee's most recent annual report projects that the program's combined trust funds could be depleted as early as 2034, less than a decade away. Now, depletion doesn't mean the program vanishes. Payroll taxes still come in and cover a significant share of benefits. But it does mean there's a real scenario where benefits get cut by 20% or more unless Congress does something. I spoke to a couple late 60s, financially comfortable, who filed years before they planned to. Their reasoning was simple. They wanted to have their foot in the door. They figured that existing beneficiaries might be protected from the worst of any future cuts. Grandfathered in. Is that guaranteed? No. Is it completely irrational? Also no. When a program's own trustees are signaling depletion within 10 years, locking in your benefit now, rather than betting on what the system looks like in 2034, is a form of risk management. It's not panic. It's hedging. One of the classic warnings against claiming at 62 is the earnings limit. The rule goes, if you're still working and you claim before full retirement age, your benefits get reduced. Currently, $1 withheld for every $2 you earn, above roughly $24,000 a year. Sounds scary, but here's what people are actually finding when they dig into it. If you're 62 and winding down doing part-time work, some consulting, a side project you're likely earning under that threshold anyway, the earnings limit simply doesn't apply to you. And for those who do have benefits withheld, that money isn't gone. The Social Security Administration adjusts your benefit upward later to account for those withheld months. It's not a permanent penalty. It's a timing shift. Once people understand that the earnings limit is more of a delay than a loss, the fear of it goes away. And that fear was keeping some people from claiming early, even when it actually made sense for them to do so. And now we get to the reason that no spreadsheet in the world can fully capture. At 62, statistically speaking, you are in better shape than you will be at 72 or 82. You can travel. You can be active. The window for certain kinds of experiences, physically demanding travel, time with aging parents, being present with grandkids, is wider now than it will be later. I talked to a woman in her early 60s who claimed the month she turned 62. She has savings. She has a pension from her old job. She didn't need the Social Security check, but she took it anyway. She said, I would rather have less money now while I can use it fully than more money later when I might not be able to. There is no financial model built to evaluate that. There's no formula that calculates the value of a road trip at 63 versus 73. There's no algorithm that accounts for the fact that your knees work differently at different ages. These people aren't being financially naive. They're making a holistic calculation about the kind of retirement they actually want to have, and that calculation includes their health, their energy, and their time, not just their account balance. And finally, the reason that shows up in virtually every study, every survey, every conversation I've had about this topic, the most human explanation of all. Social Security is not a gift. It's not a government favor. It's a deferred benefit funded by decades of payroll tax contributions from every single paycheck a worker ever received. The average worker who spent 40 years in the workforce paid into this system through recessions and recoveries, through jobs they loved and jobs they endured. And at 62, a lot of those workers look at a system that has been debating its own solvency, watched by a Congress that periodically floats benefit cut proposals, and they decide, I'm done waiting. I paid for this. I'm taking it. That is not unsophisticated thinking. That is not financial illiteracy. That is a values-based decision that puts certainty, agency, and ownership above the promise of a larger hypothetical check. a check that depends on living long enough, staying healthy enough, and trusting a system enough to deliver it. So here's where I land after 3 weeks of research, a lot of late nights, and more government reports than I care to admit. The typical person claiming Social Security at 62 isn't confused. They aren't impulsive. They ran their own math. They looked honestly at their health. They factored in the program's financial uncertainty. They asked themselves what the money could do for their lives right now versus 10 years from now. And they made a decision. For some of them, from a pure lifetime wealth perspective, waiting would have produced a better outcome. But for many of them, more than most financial commentators are willing to admit, claiming early was the right call. What the surge in early claiming really reflects is something deeper than retirement finance. It's a generation of people who've worked hard, watched the rules change around them, learned not to take institutional promises at face value, and decided, I'll take the sure thing. Whether that's the right call for you depends entirely on your health, your finances, your family, and what you actually want your retirement to look like. But the reasons behind the trend? They're a lot more thoughtful than anyone is giving them credit for. Drop a comment below, when are you planning to claim, and what's driving that decision? And if you haven't subscribed yet, join us. New video every week.